Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really crucial decade, the 1930s in Japan.
Uh-huh. We're looking at how Japan shifted pretty dramatically towards a wartime footing.
Yeah, focusing on the political and social changes that really paved the way for what came next. Think of this as a guided tour through a very pivotal time.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how different things, events, ideas started coming together. They really reshaped Japanese society, its place in the world.
So what are the key areas we'll be touching on?
We'll start with the rise of nationalism, this tightening grip. Then the military's growing power, which is a huge piece.
Okay.
Also Japan's international moves, alliances. Then the descent into that long war with China.
Oh, right, the Sino-Japanese War.
And finally, how the entire nation was mobilized, total war footing. That's a complex picture, but we'll try to break it down.
Sounds good. So let's start with nationalism. After the Manchurian incident, it seems like there was this real surge, right, in thinking, in politics. Why was that?
The Manchurian incident, yeah.
Yeah.
It created this sense of, well, national achievement for some, but it also really underlined Japan's kind of shaky international position,
Shaky how?
like isolated. And it fed this perceived need for a stronger, much more assertive foreign policy. This whole atmosphere just helped nationalist ideas gain a lot more traction.
Across the board.
Yeah, across different parts of society. And what's really interesting is you see people who were previously involved in, say, communist movements or proletarian parties.
The opposite end of the spectrum, really.
Exactly. They start shifting towards nationalism, some even aligning with the military. It wasn't just changing your mind. It was a major ideological shift, reacting to this changing political landscape.
So nationalism wasn't just growing on its own, it was actively pulling people in. And it sounds like it wasn't just about promoting ideas, but also shutting down others.
Oh, absolutely. The suppression went way beyond just communist or Marxist thought. Liberal ideas, even inside universities, face serious pressure.
You mean like academic freedom was under threat?
Definitely. Look at the Takegawa incident in 1933. Professor Takegawa Yukitoki at Kyoto Imperial University. He was suspended
For what?
for his liberal views on criminal law. The authorities said his theories went against traditional family morals.
Wow. So it wasn't just political debate, it was reaching into academic theory.
Right. It showed this growing intolerance for anything that didn't fit the dominant nationalist story. A real chilling effect, on intellectual life.
That's intense. And this pressure, it seems that it went right to the core, like how people understood the emperor's role. The emperor organ theory incident, that sounds fundamental.
It really was. So, in 1935, Minobe Tatsukichi, a very respected constitutional scholar, he'd long argued for the emperor organ theory.
Which was?
Basically, it said sovereign power lies with the state itself as a legal entity, and the emperor. He exercises that power as the state's highest organ, according to the Constitution.
Kind of placing the emperor within a modern legal framework.
Exactly. And this view, it had been pretty widely accepted for a long time in academia, politics, even the bureaucracy.
So it was mainstream then. What caused the backlash?
Well, the military and nationalist groups attacked it fiercely. They argued it totally contradicted kokutai, the sort of unique essence of the Japanese nation.
Kokukai.
Yeah, their view was that the emperor held absolute sovereignty, way above any constitution. Minobe's theory, they felt, diminished the emperor's almost divine authority.
So a clash between a constitutional view and a more maybe spiritual or traditional one?
You could put it that way.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just theory. It had real consequences.
Like what?
The government, the Okada Kaisei cabinet, they eventually caved to the pressure. They officially rejected the emperor organ theory.
They just denied it.
Yes, and they issued this national polity clarification statement, basically backing the nationalist interpretation. Plus, Minobe's books were banned, and he was forced out of the House of Peers.
So it wasn't just about suppressing one theory.
No, it seriously weakened constitutional thinking and boosted this more authoritarian view of the emperor's power. And that directly helped pave the way for the military's rise.
It really does sound like the military was becoming central. How did they gain so much political clout during these years?
Several things were going on. Japan ditching the Washington Naval Treaty, pulling out of the London Naval Disarmament Conference. That signaled a clear push for military expansion.
Which naturally boosted the military's importance.
Right. And their perceived leverage in government. Plus, successful actions like Manchuria raised their prestige and public support.
And wasn't there some infighting within the army itself? Different groups?
Oh, yeah, major internal splits. most famously between the Imperial Way faction, the Kodoha, and the Control faction, the Toseha.
Kodoha and Toseha, what was the difference?
They had different ideas about strategy, about the military's role in politics. The Kodoha tended to be more radical, pushing for rapid, aggressive expansion, maybe even bypassing civilian control.
And the Toseha?
Also expansionist. But they favored a more, let's say, systematic approach, working more with the existing bureaucracy. These tensions really boiled over.
Which brings us to the February 26th incident. That sounds like a really dramatic, violent moment.
It was February 1936. Radical young army officers tied to the Kodoha, the Imperial Way faction, they launched a revolt, led about 1,500 soldiers in Tokyo.
What were they trying to do?
Their goal was to eliminate key political figures they saw as obstacles, people blocking their vision of this super-militarized nationalist Japan. It was a direct assault on the government.
And people were killed. Important figures.
Tragically, yes. Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal Saito Makoto, Finance Minister Takahashi Korekiyo assassinated. The rebels also took over the Prime Minister's residence, other key buildings in central Tokyo. A real shock.
Must have terrified the government. How did they start it?
Martial law was declared, and ultimately the army itself put down the rebellion units loyal to the emperor and the government.
So the army suppressed its own.
Yes. And what's really key is that the ringleaders were quickly court-martialed and executed by the army authorities. Very decisive.
What did that mean for the internal army politics?
Well, it allowed the Control faction, the Toseha, to consolidate power within the army. They basically sidelined the more radical Kodoha, so the radicals' attempt kind of backfired internally.
Interesting. So the coup failed, but it sounds like the military's overall influence actually got stronger because of it. How did that work?
The aftermath just created this environment where the military could put even more pressure on the civilian government. The Hirota Koki cabinet, which formed after the incident, was under intense pressure.
And they made concessions.
A huge one. They reinstated this rule that the Army and Navy ministers had to be active duty officers.
That sounds technical, but why was it so important?
Because it basically gave the military veto power over the cabinet. If the Army or Navy didn't like who the Prime Minister wanted for those jobs, they could just refuse to provide an officer.
And the government couldn't be formed.
Exactly. It would collapse. So this massively increased their political leverage. No cabinet could really act against the military's wishes after that.
A huge power shift, almost a stranglehold. I remember reading about propaganda during the incident itself.
Yeah, while it was ongoing, there were efforts to get the soldiers to surrender, like a balloon flying overhead saying, "Do not defy the military flag under imperial command."
Trying to appeal to their loyalty.
Right. And leaflets urging the rebel troops to go back to their units. By February 29th, the rest had given up.
Okay, shifting focus a bit. Let's look at Japan's international position. It sounds like it was becoming more isolated in the late 30s.
That's definitely true. Japan's actions in Manchuria, its expansionism, it led to growing criticism, especially from the West and the League of Nations.
So traditional partners were distancing themselves.
Yes. And at the same time, Japan started getting closer to other nations that were also, challenging the existing world order.
You mean Nazi Germany and fascist Italy?
Exactly. Hitler's Germany, Mussolini's Italy, all three kind of rejected the post-World War I setup, wanted more territory, new spheres of influence, shared goals in a way.
And this led to actual agreements. I remember the Anti-Comintern Pact.
Spot on. In 1936, Japan and Germany signed the Anti-Comintern Pact. Officially, it was framed as being against international communism, the Comintern.
But it was more than that.
Oh, yeah. It was also a statement of their growing ideological closeness, a challenge to the established powers. Italy joined the next year, 1937.
Forming the tripartite Anti-Comintern Pact?
Right. And that really marked the emergence of the Axis powers, opposing the liberal democracies in the Soviet Union, a major alignment shift.
While making these new friends, Japan was still pushing hard in China, right?
Constantly. Throughout the 30s, Japan kept expanding its influence, especially in northern China, often by supporting local warlords, creating sort of autonomous regions under Japanese sway.
Weakening the central Chinese government in Nanjing.
Precisely. This kind of piecemeal expansion just set the stage for a bigger fight.
And meanwhile, China itself was divided. The nationalists and communists were still fighting, weren't they?
Yes. That ongoing civil war definitely made things easier for Japan, in some ways. China's disunity created openings.
But didn't something happen that forced them to cooperate, at least for a while?
You're thinking of the Xi'an incident in 1936, a really pivotal moment. Zhang Chuiliang, a powerful northern warlord, actually detained Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist leader,
Detained him. Why?
to force him to stop fighting the communists and instead focus on resisting Japan. Zhang wanted a united front against the Japanese.
So an internal Chinese conflict actually pushed them together against Japan. That's ironic.
It is. The Shan incident definitely created momentum for cooperation between the nationalists and communists. It was a fragile truce, sure, but it signaled a major shift in Chinese resistance.
But even that fragile unity couldn't stop the slide into full-scale war. The Marco Polo Bridge incident is usually seen as the trigger.
That's the one. July 7th, 8th, 1937. Near Beijing, or Beiping as it was called then, the Lukuku incident. It started as a, well, relatively small clash between Japanese and Chinese troops stationed nearby.
It's a local skirmish. How did it blow up?
Through a mix of miscalculation, escalating tensions, probably deliberate actions on some parts, it just spiraled very quickly.
And it didn't stay local near Beijing for long.
No. Soon after, much larger fighting broke out in Shanghai. That was huge. It brought the conflict right into central China, a major international city.
So Japan just kept sending more troops.
Yes, large forces were deployed continuously, and the battle lines just kept expanding across China.
And the Chinese response, did the United Front hold?
They did form it, officially, the Anti-Japanese National United Front, the Second United Front. Nationalists and communists agreeing to fight Japan together. It was often uneasy cooperation, but it was a unified resistance effort.
So Marco Polo Bridge marks the start of the big war, the Second Sino-Japanese War, even without a formal declaration at first.
That's right. No formal declaration. Initially, it was called the North China Incident.
Just an incident.
Right. Then, as it spread south, it became the Sino-Japanese Incident, or Shinaji-hen in Japanese. The term Sino-Japanese War, Nikkei Kaizen, really only became common much later, after relations normalized.
It's chilling how terminology can downplay something so huge. And this war involved terrible violence, didn't it? Nanjing comes to mind.
December 1937. Japanese forces captured Nanjing, China's capital at the time. What followed was the Nanjing Massacre. Widespread killing and brutalization of Chinese civilians and unarmed soldiers by the Japanese army.
An atrocity that shocked the world.
It drew huge international condemnation, absolutely. And it remains an incredibly painful and sensitive part of history.
A horrific reminder of the human cost. Were there any attempts to stop the fighting diplomatically after Nanjing?
Some limited efforts were made. Germany tried to mediate peace talks.
But they failed.
They did.
Yeah.
Largely because the demands from the Japanese side were seen as just too excessive. It suggests Japan wasn't really looking for a negotiated peace at that point.
And didn't the Japanese government then basically slam the door shut on talks, the Kano Statement?
Yes. January 1938. The first Kano-Fumimaro cabinet declared the government would not deal with the nationalist government anymore.
Not deal with Chiang Kai-shek's government.
Correct. Even against advice from some of the military leadership. This Kano statement effectively killed any immediate chance for peace talks with the recognized government of China. It signaled Japan was digging in, determined to win militarily.
So if not peace, what was Japan's stated goal? What were they fighting for, according to the government?
The Kano cabinet started talking about establishing a new order in East Asia. This vision was based on supposed cooperation between Japan, China, and Manchukuo, the puppet state in Manchuria.
And they tried to set up a Chinese government that would cooperate.
Yes, in 1940, they installed a new regime in Nanjing, led by Wang Jingwei. He was a major figure who had defected from the nationalists.
But Chiang Kai-shek's government didn't just give up.
No, they retreated inland to Chongqing and kept resisting. And they got support from the U.S., Britain, the Soviet Union.
Which meant Japan was stuck.
Stuck in a huge, draining, seemingly endless war in China. It tied up vast resources. And then the U.S. started putting on economic pressure.
Like cutting off trade.
They signaled it clearly. In July 1939, the U.S. announced it was abrogating the Japan-U.S. Treaty of Commerce and Navigation, effective January 1940. A major economic blow was coming.
So war dragging on, international pressure building. Japan needed to sustain this somehow.
Yeah.
Which leads to total mobilization, right? Gearing the whole country for war.
Exactly. With the war in China becoming this long, grinding conflict, the government knew it had to find ways to funnel all national resources, people, materials, money into the war effort. This was about transforming the entire society and economy.
And one early move was the National Spiritual Mobilization Movement. What was that about?
It was about creating a unified mindset, trying to instill patriotism, sacrifice, loyalty to the emperor and the war across the whole population. like a big propaganda campaign to get everyone on board, feeling personally invested.
Trying to control hearts and minds.
You could say that. And at the same time, the government was looking seriously at how other countries managed their economies, for state goals, studying Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, for models of state control.
And then came actual laws giving the government huge power. The National General Mobilization Law sounds key.
Absolutely pivotal.
Yeah.
Passed in 1938, it gave the government incredibly broad powers to mobilize basically everything for the war.
Like what specifically?
Controlling resources, drafting labor, regulating prices, wages, and the crucial part, they could do this without needing approval from the parliament to diet.
Bypassing democracy, essentially.
A huge shift of power to the executive. It really dismantled parliamentary checks on war and economic policy. Very significant consequences.
And you could see the shift in the budget, I imagine. Military spending must have exploded.
Exploded is right. By fiscal year 1938, military spending was about 75% of the entire central government budget. Just shows the absolute priority. Detailed plans were made to ensure materials went to military production first.
And it wasn't just materials, people were mobilized too. Civilians.
Yes. The National Requisition Ordinance in 1939 allowed the government to draft civilians to work in military industries, which were expanding rapidly.
So people were basically told where to work.
In many cases, yes. And within companies, you had these industrial patriotic associations, Sanjo Hokukukai.
Sanjo Hokukukai, what did they do?
They brought labor and management together in each company, supposedly to cooperate for the war effort, fostering this sense of shared purpose, all contributing to victory.
Creating unity in the workplace for the war. Did these become widespread?
Very. And in 1940, they were all merged into one big national organization, the Greater Japan Industrial Patriotic Association, Dai Nippon Sanjo Hokukukai.
And what happened to independent labor unions?
They were dissolved. This whole process basically consolidated government control over labor, eliminating any potential opposition or separate interests.
So while the military industries boomed,
Yes, production of planes, ships, weapons grew dramatically.
what was happening to the civilian side of the economy?
It was squeezed hard. Production and imports of goods for ordinary people were cut way back. Shortages, hardship, that became the norm.
Daily life must have changed drastically for everyone.
Profoundly. Starting around 1940, 1941, rationing systems came in for essentials. Sugar, matches, charcoal, even rice and clothes, you needed coupons.
Coupons for basic necessities.
Yes, and farmers had quotas for delivering rice to the state. Consumer goods just got scarcer and scarcer. Austerity was everywhere, summed up by that slogan, luxury is the enemy.
Not just material hardship, but a whole change in mindset being pushed.
Absolutely. Everything's subordinated to the war. I think there's an image, isn't there, of early coupon sales?
Yeah, from Nagano, December 39. Shows people using coupons and money, points for goods, really brings home those daily restrictions.
It does. And there are graphs showing military spending just taking over the government budget, dominating national income. It visually captures that massive shift of resources.
So pulling it all together, we've seen this rise of nationalism, the military taking control politically, Japan aligning with the Axis, falling into this huge war in China. And all of that leading to the entire nation being put on a total war footing, completely reshaping society.
And maybe a final thought for you listening to this. Try to consider how all that pressure, the suppression of different views, the constant push for unity, how might that have actually felt for ordinary Japanese people living through it day to day?
What gets lost, maybe?
Yeah. What were the long-term effects of these huge societal changes? Not just for the war years, but for the decades that came after. Something to really mull over.